So today, we're going to tear apart a system of power, of discipline, and, well, ultimately of chaos. We're going to walk through every single rank of the Italian army during World War II, from the lowest private stuck in the desert all the way up to the marshals in Rome. We're going to see how this whole structure shaped a nation's war, and more importantly, how it all came crashing down. And that, right there, is the heart of it. An order is just a word, but it travels down a chain, right? A carefully built ladder of authority. Every single rung on that ladder is a rank, and each one carries this incredible weight of responsibility and consequence. You know, this chain of command, it's the invisible architecture of any army. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the unique political tension right at the very top. Then, we're going to build this army from the ground up, starting with its foundation, the enlisted men. We'll climb the ladder to the officers who had to carry the real burden of command, and then up to the generals, the guys who were the architects of the war. And finally, we'll get to the moment it all just shattered. Okay, let's dive right in. To really get the Italian army of World War II, the Regio Esercito, you've got to look at where it came from. See, this wasn't some new army created by the fascist regime. Nope. It was inherited from the old 19th century Royal Army, with a very rigid, very traditional structure. But that created this deep internal conflict, a real struggle for the soul of the army, caught between loyalty to a king and loyalty to a charismatic dictator. And this split identity, it's at the absolute heart of the Italian army's story. I mean, on one hand, you've got the king as the formal supreme commander, the uniforms, the traditions, even the names of the ranks were all tied to the monarchy. But the real power, the guy calling the shots, was Benito Mussolini. So you have a royal army being steered by a fascist ideology. Just imagine the confusion for a soldier. Who are you supposed to be loyal to? The king, whose face is on your medals, or the duce, whose slogans are everywhere? This tension was always there, simmering just beneath the surface, a crack in the foundation just waiting to break. Every army is basically a pyramid, right? And its base, the thing holding everything up, is made of the enlisted soldiers and the non-commissioned officers, or NCOs. These were the guys carrying the rifles, digging the trenches. They're the ones who paid the ultimate price for the orders that came down from above. So let's see what that journey looked like for them. It all starts with the soldato, the private, the most common soldier, and by far the most vulnerable. He was the one freezing near Stalingrad or baking in the Libyan desert. Getting promoted to caporale, or corporal, meant you got a little stripe, sure, but it was a huge leap in responsibility. Now you're leading a handful of men, where every single decision could be life or death. Above him, the sergente. And finally, you had the maresciallo, who was often this grizzled old veteran who knew the brutal truth of war way better than any fresh-faced officer. And let's just focus on the sergeant for a second, because this guy is the absolute linchpin of the entire system. He was the connection between the officers giving orders and the soldiers carrying them out. He was the one shouting, making sure things got done, and holding the line when everything was going to hell. He was the human engine of discipline out there. Without him, an officer's brilliant plan was just a theory. Okay, let's climb that ladder a bit and see how this builds. Now we're with the junior officers. For these guys, a rank wasn't just a job. It was about social status, education, family honor, all of it. They were the ones who had to take the cold, clean lines on a map and turn them into the chaotic, bloody reality of combat. So the journey starts as a sotto tenente, a second lieutenant, and this is the first time a man gives an order that he absolutely knows, could get someone killed. As a tenente, or lieutenant, his responsibility grows to a whole platoon, maybe 40 men that he's expected to lead from the front. But the really heavy weight, that fell on the capitano, the captain, who was in charge of a full company. And man, just think about that pressure. As a captain, you're responsible for up to 200 men. You're the one deciding who runs into machine gun fire and who stays back. The accounts from the war, they tell us about captains in North Africa who went for days without sleep, or commanders on the Eastern Front losing half their company in a single week. This was the absolute sharp end of command. All right, now we're reaching the top of the pyramid. We're talking about the field officers and the generals. Up here, war is a totally different beast. It's less about the immediate firefight and much more about logistics, about grand strategy, about moving thousands of lives across a map like they're just pieces on a chessboard. The scale just explodes. A major, he's the bridge between the battlefield and HQ. A colonel commands a whole regiment, thousands of men. But then you get into the realm of the generals, where the battlefield really does just become a map. A brigadier general has a brigade, A division general has a division of over 10,000 men, and it just keeps going up, all the way to an army general who could be responsible for an entire front. And at the very, very top, there was a special rank, Marshal of Italy, Marshal of Italy. Only a handful of men ever held that title, a symbol of ultimate authority, guys who answered only to Mussolini and the king. But this is where you see the real tragedy of the Italian war effort. See, a general could have the highest rank in the land and the most brilliant strategy, but rank can't conjure up tanks or ammunition or fuel out of thin air. The Italian high command was constantly crippled by awful equipment shortages and tanks that were basically obsolete before they even got to the battlefield. So yeah, their authority on paper was real, but their tools were completely inadequate. And that disconnect, that created this incredibly brittle structure, just waiting to snap under pressure. For years, this system, as flawed as it was, it managed to hold together. An order given at the top would eventually make its way to the bottom. But then came the breaking point. On September 8, 1943, Italy surrendered to the Allies. And in a single day, the entire structure of command just detonated.
It's a terrifying question for any military, right? A chain is only as strong as its links. So when the very top link, the central government, shatters, what happens to the rest of the chain? The answer is just chaos, pure chaos. The speed of it all was just staggering. The armistice gets announced, and literally overnight, the hierarchy that had defined every soldier's entire existence just dissolved. The king and the high command, they fled Rome, leaving the army with no clear leadership at the worst possible moment, right when their former German allies were suddenly becoming their occupiers. And the result? It was total anarchy, a complete and utter breakdown of the system. Generals were getting conflicting orders, or sometimes no orders at all. Captains had to make these impossible choices. Do I obey the Germans, stay loyal to a king who's miles away, or do I just try to save my men? And for the poor common soldier, it was even worse. A lot of them were just abandoned, waiting for an order that never came as German troops moved in to disarm and imprison them. The army just fractured into a dozen different loyalties. And this statement, it just perfectly captures the human cost of that collapse. Think about it. The rank stitched onto a man's uniform was the same, but its meaning had been totally flipped on its head. A sergeant, the guy who was the enforcer of discipline, was now a helpless prisoner of the Germans. A captain, an agent of the state, might now become a partisan, joining the resistance to fight against their former allies. The system was gone. All that was left were individual choices. And that brings us right back to where we started. The whole elaborate system of ranks in the Italian army was really just a mechanism for passing down orders. It was a structure of power. But in the end, it was a brutal lesson that a perfect hierarchy, especially one that's divided at the very top, is no substitute for industrial strength and clear, decisive leadership. Rank defines who gives the order, but history and reality, they're the ones that define the consequence.